Hello YouTube. This is just a random video I'm making. It's called Having a Bear with Everret. And we're basically just going to discuss, you know, some things. Like, people always wonder, like, you know, you're into very dark kind of stuff. You know, whether that's movies or films or some of the music I listen to or the games I play, why are you into dark stuff? And the thing is, I'm not always into dark stuff. It's just that, you know, let's say horror movies. Horror movies are what I like the best. You know, I know some people might say, hey, that's kind of a dark kind of thing, you know, kind of negative. I don't really think so. I think a horror movie can be a positive thing. There's a lot of positive things about horror films, and there's also kind of a satisfying feeling in a safe scare. I think sometimes the reason why I like horror films is that you can tackle certain issues that you cannot tackle in any other genre, you know, film. And also, horror is so diverse of a genre. You know, it's a genre that is made up of subgenres. Now, when you think of what a horror film is, let's just take a look at the word, the keyword horror. Are you in horror of something? You're like horror being afraid, or I would say the word horror would mean something different than like a thriller or a terror or something like that. When I think of horror films, and I would say simply horrifying horror films, I would say that there's some, it's kind of, I would say it's something like The Exorcist. I know that the makers of the film and Warner Brothers and the Academy and all those people and the critics don't like calling it a horror film. They don't like it. They're like, man, we ain't gonna call it a horror film. It's a thriller, it's a drama, whatever. It's a horror film. A little girl gets possessed by the devil, and they have to do an exorcism. That's a horror film. Whether you wanna call it one or not, it is a horror film. And the reason why it's a horror film is because you really do feel horrified when watching it. Well, depending on who you are. That is one film that to this day, no matter how many times I've seen it, scares the hell out of me. And, you know, I know some people, when they think of horror films, I think of the more cheesier, campier, formulaic films, you know, let's say something like along the lines of a Friday the 13th or a Halloween. Or, you know, one of the Friday the 13th or Halloween's knockoffs. And I really think, whenever someone whenever, like I said, the camera died, so whenever that happens and you see a rough cut, that's because either the camera died or something happened, and I do apologize for that greatly. But what I was saying before that we had that issue with the camera, whenever someone just says, oh, well, horror films are real bad, I'd like to bring The Exorcist up, the original Halloween, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then Frankenstein, 1931, Night of the Dead from 1968. Just, you know, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, the original. I mean, the later films yeah, get bad. And even something like a Don't Go in the House or a Cannibal Holocaust. Those are well-made horror films. They're well-made films in general. And I think that's the big thing about horror, is every genre has films that aren't very good. That's all genres of films. whether it's an action or a comedy, a drama, a romantic, fiction type film. It goes for novelizations too. You know, every genre has their bad ones. But for me, I really think horror films are very important because as a society, it's a safe scare. And I really think they're well made, and one of the main reasons I'm drawn to them is because I always kind of felt like an outcast. And I always caught a lot of shit and just had to just put up with a lot of shit. And I can kind of relate to some of the monsters in horror films. And when I say the monsters, I don't necessarily mean the slashers, but, you know, like more like the Universal monsters. I mean, most of the Universal monsters were misunderstood monsters. You know, the Phantom, the Frankenstein monster, even Dracula to an extent, and of course the you know, I would say the martyr himself, Larry Talbot, no, the Wolfman, you know, are very good examples of that. You know, I think if we're gonna make a horror film, first you would have to make a good film. I mean, that's really it's just like with any movie, you gotta make a good film. You're trying to get a response out of the crowd. You know, I forgot who told me this or who said it or whatever, but it's true. A horror film or a comedy or any type of film that brings emotion out, you know, you gotta kind of think of it like lovemaking, like being intimate with someone. You want it to last, and you want there to be a big payoff. So it's kind of like, the pacing in your film is kind of like being intimate, you know, or having sex. Like I said, I'm not trying to be vulgar, but it's like having sex or being intimate. You want to have a little bit of foreplay. You want to build it up. You want to have the right lighting, the right music, and as the camera going along, or as a performer on screen, you want to have the right movements and motions. And then when it crescendos, and you blow your load and you have your orgasm, that's like the scare. So you kind of raise it up, and you kind of get that reaction, both audible and hopefully emotional and stuff, out of your crowd. And like I said, if I offended anybody watching with that example, I do apologize. I wasn't trying to be vulgar, but what I'm saying is that's kind of the way how to look at making a film. Like, I want to be a filmmaker, and that's what I would do. You gotta think of your horror film as being intimate with your partner. You know, you gotta you gotta elicit that emotion, that response, the right lighting, the right movement, the right angle. And you build it all up to that crescendo, and you release with the scare. Now, sometimes there are films that are deemed too intense. You know, going back to lovemaking, you don't want to be too intense. You know, you want it to be right, and you want it to be intense. You want to be intense, but you want to have that big release, and you want to have the right motions and all that, like I talked about. You know, also, I would say if you're gonna make a horror film, there's nothing scarier than real life. I would say if you're going to make a horror film, look around you. You know, to me, you know, I'd rather run into Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers or Frankenstein monster, any of them, compared to some of the people you see on the news. Take a look at real life. Real life is some of the most terrifying, scary, most horrifying things ever. There's nothing scarier than real life. And a lot of films kind of draw from real life. And I think if you see that, you know, that's something that you need to take a look at, and that's something that you can embrace, is fear. But you don't want to be too gross out. It's, you know, another thing, you know, I think John Landis said it best, you know, it's easy to like gross somebody out, or to like maybe elicit a horrifying response. Show them a graphic image, show them something gross, and I'm like, oh, you know. But that's not the horror you want. You want to get underneath their skin. And almost going back to, like I said, it's like being intimate. You want to be able to know, you want to be able to get into your audience, to be with them in that kind of way, and to help them exhibit that good, clean fear. And to me, a lot of horror films do that. And, you know, I love movies in general. It's not just horror films, but this is just one of the reasons why I just want to make a video explaining why I prefer horror. Or just why horror. That's probably going to be the name of the video. Anyways, thank you for watching, and having a beer with Everett. Go out, get you some old Milwaukee, and watch a good horror film.